you are important partners in our community, or institutions in our community that we value, and that's why you're here today. About 15 years ago, Clinton had a lot more hair, and mine was very dark. We're in the middle of a process with Time Warner, renegotiating our cable franchise agreement, right, Clint?
Yes, sir.
And John, you were there, right?
Yes, I was now.
One of the most excruciating terms of life. And we're still in therapy over it, right? But we made it through it. We made ourselves through it, and our franchise is expiring again in 2021. And we're starting now because it takes time to gear up for that, work with the cable company, and deliver a new franchise agreement. So we're doing things a little different this time around than we did 15 years ago. We want to be more intentional about understanding the needs of our organization, but also the needs of our community, and the needs that you might have, or interests that you might have, or that your clients might have, people you work with, on how our cable TV franchise could be shaped to service for the next probably 10 years, 10 years or so. So that's why you're here. This is kind of the start. This is the kickoff of a series of interactions with our community to do this needs assessment. And Sue Buske is going to be helping with that. And Jackie is the lead person internally. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Sue.
Great.
Thanks, Sue.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I want you to think for a minute, when you're just talking about the franchise being renewed, and the last time around it was essentially 2006. Now, think about technology in 2006, how you were using it, how the community used it. Now think about technology now in communications. Now, the franchise that is going to be renewed through an excruciating process, which it actually pretty much is probably not going to expire till 2031. It'll be 10 years from 2021. So a key part of the franchise renewal process is to really envision where this community is going to go in the next 10 years. What are the communications needs of the agencies that serve the public themselves? What do we need to make sure is in place in this franchise agreement? So there's essentially, this is a point of an enormous opportunity. And my job will be to help the city gather information about what the vision for the future is, and also to give you guys a sense of what's happening in other places. What are some of the cutting edge things that have happened in the last few years with regard to the cable franchise agreements that have been negotiated elsewhere? But before we get going today in this sort of stakeholder leadership meeting, which we kind of call it, you may all know each other, or most of you, but I don't know you. So could we go around the room really quickly and have everybody say who you are and what organization or institution or business or whatever you are with? And I'm going to start over here.
Thank you. My name is Jason West. I'm the Recreation Superintendent for the City of St. Louis Park.
Cool.
I'm Cindy Walsh. I'm the Operations and Recreation Director for the city.
Jerry Pettinger. I'm the Athletic and Activities Director at Biddle and St. Margaret's.
Okay.
Jason Isel, the Rec Center Manager with the City of St. Louis Park.
I'm Judith Cook, and I'm here representing the Senior Council today.
Great.
I'm John Plates. I'm with the Twin West Chamber of Commerce. I'm new, so I just started about a month ago.
I'm Megan Peterson. I'm our Director of Marketing and Communications at Biddle St. Margaret's School.
I'm Derek Riza. I'm with STEP St. Louis Park Emergency Program, which we service about 7 to 8% of the residents with basic services.
I'm Lisa Green, Community Education Director, St. Louis Park Public Schools.
I'm Tom Marvel. I'm the Director of Information Services for St. Louis Park Public Schools.
Paul Broden, St. Louis Park TV.
I'm Claude Pires, Chief Information Officer for the City of St. Louis Park.
Jackie Smith, Communications and Marketing Manager for the city.
Meredith Sanville. I'm also here with the St. Louis Park Senior Program.
John McHugh, City of St. Louis Park TV.
Jamie Marshall, Executive Director, St. Louis Park Friends of the Arts.
Cindy Hoffman, Vice Chair on the Communications
Information, Telecommunications Advisory.
Community Technology Advisory Commission.
Thank you. We just changed our name.
That's what I learned, in fact. So how many of you actually, how many of you have watched city council meetings or any of the programming that might be on the Park TV channels? Just hands. What have you watched? Just yell it out. Go.
Well, I watch all the games that Paul broadcasts for either St. Louis Park or Benil St. Margaret. So, and I am, despite working at Benil St. Margaret, I am a resident of St. Louis Park too. So,
Anybody else? What have you watched?
I watch the, sometimes I watch the council meetings and some of the commission meetings. And the things that the League of Women Voters has had on the Park TV.
What, I'm just curious, what sort of things has the league done? I don't know. I've heard other places, but not
Well,
here.
they have forums where they interview candidates for city council and representatives to the state. And they, in the past, they've had meetings where they've discussed topics that should be important, political topics.
Cool. Anyone else watch something different than sports or league or city council meetings?
Concerts at Wolf Park.
Concerts at what? Oh, what kind of arts things? Have
Yeah, there's a concert series at the Wolf Park Amphitheater. So those are weekly concerts and, well, more than weekly. We've had some of our poetry jams or other programming recorded as well.
So what I'm going to do today, first of all, in your kit, there's some things we want to kind of draw your attention to, and I'll be sort of aiming you at them as we go through. The PowerPoint that I'm using is actually in the kit. What I want to do today is basically give you some information on cable basics, how and why franchising even exists, some basic cable facts specific to this community, a little bit about what the opportunities are, what's happening in other communities as far as particularly their community programming, the kinds of things that are running on their what we call their access channels or the community channels, and the sort of new direction we're seeing things go, which is really tied to the different ways people are using media tools today, in contrast to the way they were using media tools in 2006 or 2007. And we're also going to, my job is to answer your questions. So please feel free, as we sort of go through the sort of information that we have for you today, to ask questions as we go along. And at the end of our time together, we're going to have a little charge for all of you, some things you can really do to help the city get a lot of public input. Because public input is absolutely critical to the franchise renewal process and to what pops out the other end of the painful process that it really ends up being. So with that, let's anchor things a little bit. The reason why there's a franchise agreement. Well, the franchise agreement is really a sophisticated land use agreement. The cable operator is a tenant on the public's property. The local government is responsible for taking care of the public's property and giving people access to it. So essentially the relationship between the cable operator and the local government is a landlord-tenant relationship. And when you have a landlord-tenant relationship, the tenant has to pay rent. So part of what gets negotiated, so to speak, in a franchise agreement is what is the rent that the cable operator is going to have to pay for using your property, the public's property, to make a lot of money. Now these franchises are typically 10 years long. The one that's expiring here is actually a 15-year franchise, which was one of, we just don't see 15-year franchises anymore. Just given the extraordinary speed of change in the communications and technology arena, it doesn't make a lot of sense to grant them for more than 10. Some people say to me, well, Sue, why can't they be shorter? Let's have a 5-year franchise if everything's changing so fast. The quandary is this: the federal process for renewal, and there is a process local governments have to go through, is a 3-year process. So if you're granting a 5-year franchise, you're in renewal in 2 years after you finish the process. So typically neither the cable operator or the local government typically find it to their advantage to issue a franchise that's going to be in place for 2 years, and then you're back in this rather long, elongated 3-year negotiation process, which is why we typically don't see these shorter ones. Occasionally, we'll see one that's, let's say, an existing franchise is extended for 2 or 3 years. You can see that from time to time. One of the things that's happening in today's world, and it applies to franchises, is that basically you have 3 tiers of law applying to this process. You've got federal law, okay? You've got, in some cases, state law. And the amount of state law in this arena varies a lot from one state to the other. For instance, and then you've got the local franchising, the local law, which is the cable company coming to the local government to get the franchise agreement. Now, I have to say, when in 2006, when this franchise was granted, it was right at a point in time where a number of states removed the authority of local governments to control their right-of-way and to control their ability to negotiate these agreements to best represent the interests of their community. So it used to be that pretty much all but 2 states had local franchising. Well, in today's world, there's only 26 states now. And a lot of us states, the state has removed the authority from local government, moved it to the state level, and grants a one-size-fits-all, whether you're an enormous city or whether you're a little town of 800 people, which is not exactly a wise move when you get right down to it. Communities vary greatly, and their communication needs are logically going to vary greatly. But the process we're in, the local cable franchising process, is really one that's controlled by federal, state, and local law. But at its core, it is about you guys, and it's about the people you serve and making sure that they get the services that they want. So let's kind of click on and take a look at some very basic stuff I have up here about the franchises right now. The franchise with Comcast expires in January of 2021. There are about 10,600 households that subscribe to cable here in St. Louis Park. And that number has been dropping gradually as people disconnect the cable. Well, see, technically don't disconnect the cable, because the cable company does cable, i.e. video, broadband, i.e. internet, and telephone. So just because you disconnect your traditional cable thing doesn't mean, as you well know, you're disconnecting the cable. The cable company is still there. They're still providing you a service. They're still generating revenue from using the public rights of way here in the community. The conundrum we have in this arena is that there are 3 bodies of law that apply to internet, to telephone, and to cable. And so the city has the authority over the cable part. And so that's what we negotiate for. So negotiate regarding, but everything still runs on one wire. And that is sometimes for some folks, particularly older folks, it's complicated. You don't usually deal with that kind of stuff, but that's the way it works. So let's take a look at a few more of the specifics. The rent in the current franchise agreement here in St. Louis Park is 5% of the gross TV revenues. The cities cannot collect franchise fees from the internet revenue or from the telephone revenues that the cable company generates. They only can collect their franchise fee from the rent from the cable revenue, okay? So that's part of what the cable company's got to give back for using your streets and right-of-way, okay? Another thing they have to give back, another part of their rent, is the fact that you have these community channels, on the channels, Park TV channels. And so you have the channels, and you have the ability to have some funding to help operate those channels. That's part of what comes through the franchise agreement as well. The other thing that's in the franchise agreement is connections to allow you to go live from certain locations around the community, okay? And also free complimentary drops to school buildings, libraries, municipal buildings. Those are all the sorts of things that are part of the rent for the use of the right-of-way that is in the current franchise. Now, all of that goes away. It's not like when we renegotiate the franchise. It's not like we start there and then add to that. Technically it's a complete reboot process. You start from the beginning. And under law, it says we have to justify what we're asking for when we're negotiating a franchise representing a community. So that's why this needs assessment process and also making sure the company complied with its current contract becomes pretty important, because that's what you're using that information to sort of build a legal case to make sure we continue to have access channels and having the Park TV channels and having some funding and resources to do more concerts, to do more football games, to do more public meeting coverage. I was over in Grand Rapids, Minnesota last week and having a meeting like this. And we had some people there were going, we want every single board and commission meeting covered. We want it live. I mean, right now they're doing planning commission and city council. But and not only in their case, because they're a consortia, not only for the city of Grand Rapids, but for Harrison Township and a number of the other small communities up there. They want more meeting coverage. That was something we heard from the community when we did our brainstorming during our community focus group meetings. So what is available in the future to make that happen, those sorts of things happen here, will be dictated by what we hear over the next 6 months in our public input process. And then we take that to the negotiating table. So questions so far? I'm trying to kind of get you kind of anchored in what the city has to go through when it does this.
Can you lower my cable fee?
I wish I could. Unfortunately, cable rates are deregulated at federal level. And that's something that we hear sometimes, well, pretty frequently from people in communities. They want their rates lowered. I've been working in this field a long time. And when I first started working in this field, rates were regulated. And first everything was rate regulated, and then it was like the HBOs and the Showtime were deregulated, and the commercial, the movie channels and that sort of thing. And then probably upwards to 10 years ago, or maybe a little bit more, actually more like 15, the Federal Communications Commission basically then went back and pretty much deregulated all rates. There are very, very few communities in the country that still regulate rates, but they are by far the exception and the rule. So we cannot tell the cable company what to charge, and we cannot tell the cable company what services to carry. And that's another area where folks say, well, I really don't like that channel. Can we get something else instead? And city can't do that. It impinges on the in quotes First Amendment rights of the cable company. Other questions? Making sense so far? How many of you were around in 2006 when the city went through this process, or before? Okay. So
what a great deal we got.
Oh, actually, we did. Tomorrow, because the city manager.
So I've talked a bit about, so what is the process the city has to go through, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Why you have to go through the process, why it's important to go through the process properly, and you probably want to know, what does the cable company get out of all of this at the end of the day? So that's what I try to show on this slide. There are roughly 10,600 subscribers now. The average cable subscriber in the United States for the cable portion of their bill, not for the internet and telephone, pays $120 a month. So you do the math. You just do the math. 10,600 times $120 a month times 12 months times 10 years. That's $152,640,000, and that assumes no rate increases. Okay. And that doesn't include the internet and the telephone. So you can easily double and probably easily triple the revenue just from St. Louis Park that the company will benefit from having their franchise renewed. And now we're talking, if we just double it, we're talking about $300 million. And I think really tripling it is getting closer to the revenue at stake here. So that's why these franchise renewal processes can take a long time and can be kind of painful, because the cable company really doesn't want to, they want to reduce their rent. They don't want to pay any more than they have to, because they want to maximize their profitability on the other side. Now, the thing that is really annoying to a lot of people when you start to understand this is the fact that they don't have to pay rent on the telephone and the internet revenue. That's a free ride. The only place under the three bodies of law we have under federal law that they have to pay rent is for the cable part. All right? So the way those of us who work in this field now look at these negotiations is we don't have the authority under law to charge rent for the internet and the telephony, but it's still run all in the same wire. So we have to be very, very clear and very and justify and negotiate hard where we can to get things to give back to our communities, to make sure our communities can really use this technology for something more than stuff coming from somewhere else. To show programming about the needs of the homeless in our community, the arts things that are happening, transparency in local government, being able to have discussion and dialogue around a whole array of different issues. These are the sorts of things that when we think about where the community is, how the community is going to change in the next 10 years, we need to think about that stuff. The business community, how does the business community want to be able to use the cable system? These are things we need to think about. How many of you are with organizations that have strategic plans? Okay. A lot. A good and interesting way of looking at, as we think about going forward, what we want to have in that new franchise or what we want to be able to do, is to look at your strategic planning documents and look at how you or your organization or agency needs to communicate with the public and get information out. That's one of the things we have a lot of authority out in this renewal process. It's about being able to have channels, being able to have the means to create content to put on those channels and to stream those channels on the internet. Because the content that is created is not limited just to the cable part. It's limited to also you can stream it on the internet, as you guys are in this community are already doing. So I want to give you a sense of some of the stuff we're seeing coming out of the renewed franchise agreements. Number one, customer service standards that guarantee that when you call the cable company and you have a problem, they come right away. They answer the phone quickly. They're courteous, so it's customer service standards. Another thing is all the support for your community channels. Right now, you have only one of your channels that is the same technical quality as the commercial channels on the cable system. How many of you subscribe to, I'm actually curious, how many subscribe to cable, first of all? Interesting, okay. And so those of you who don't subscribe to cable, do you watch the council meetings and stuff online? Is that where you watch it?
Yeah, and I don't live here, so.
No, that's okay.
You can leave now.
I actually have to be at all the school board meetings, so I don't need to watch them.
So you don't have to watch them because you're there. I get it.
Yeah, I watch it.
You watch it online?
Yeah.
You watch it on stream? Okay. So here's the thing. Right now, your franchise agreement doesn't require the cable company to provide the channels in high definition or whatever may be 5G or whatever may be the highest qualities that you're going to see on your commercial channels in the future. It's not required. So the company doesn't do it. They won't do anything unless they're obligated contractually to do it. So what we find in many communities is one of the key things that comes out of the franchise renewal process is that all of the channels that are community channels can be technically of an equivalent standard and technology to all the other channels on the cable system. The content is being created so that it can be broadcast that way, but the cable operator steps on the signal, reduces it down to standard definition, and even though it's created in high definition when it's broadcast, with the exception of one channel, it's only in standard definition. So opportunities for the future are to make sure that your community channels are technically of an equivalent standard to commercial channels, which makes sense. Okay. Making sure that when you go to the programming guide and you see Criminal Minds description of the program, okay, when you go and look up your channel 14, 15, 16, it may say it says government programming. It doesn't, or education. It doesn't say what it's about. Right. That's and that's the functionality. It allows you to record something on your DVR. That is currently not available to the community channels. Okay. That is another thing we see coming out of franchise renewal process. This seems, some people say, well, why doesn't the cable company do this anyway? Because they don't have to, because they're not required to. And so again, these are some of the things that we're seeing that are coming out of the franchise renewal process in other communities. Assuring that in general, the technical quality and feasibility of all of the channels, be they the commercial channels or the access channels, are equivalent. There's a lot of the ability to go live from parks, from any location in the community, or have the funding for the equipment necessary to go live. These are all things that can be part of the franchise agreement. In some cases, you have some of that in your current agreement. In some cases, you don't have maybe everything that might be desired for the future. But there's another really big change that's happening around the country right now in how people are looking at what should be in these franchise agreements and how they should be using the cable system. And that is, we don't talk about this as community TV anymore. What we talk about is community media and technology centers. Places where people can go, whether it's at a library, at a school, at a nonprofit organization, where the public can have access to the tools of the media, and not just to make TV, but just to have basic skills. I'm about to show you a clip of a video. This comes from the city of Gresham, Oregon, which is a suburb of Portland. And they have an organization there who runs their community channels, the equivalent of their Park TV channels, called Metro East. And Metro East partnered with the city of Gresham on a project, which was a community redevelopment project in a particular neighborhood called the Rockwood neighborhood. And this was a neighborhood that had a lot of new immigrants, low-income folks, and at the same time, a lot of seniors who'd lived in that area for a long time. So what the direction you're going to see with this is that we're taking the concept of how we can use the communications tools in our community that can come from the franchise agreement in a way that's more than just about making a TV show, but about really providing grassroots at the neighborhood level services that people need to help have better lives. So I'm going to show you this clip, and it's called DIY Rockwood, Digital Inclusion and Youth Rockwood. Can you hear that? I don't think it's loud enough.
So we're here out at Rockwood DIY, which is Rockwood Digital Inclusion and Youth. And our goal is to bridge the digital gap so that everybody has access to the
same opportunities as other people. You see them over the course of 5 weeks really become more comfortable with the equipment itself and not afraid to start doing things on their own. They'll start clicking off into their own websites.
Changing language.
Video builds.
Like Google, Chrome.
Creating your own space online. And upon completion of this program, they get a free computer.
Working together made something really cool
File
happen.
that away, they get a free computer at the completed
We use video games to inspire young people about their future and use the games that they love to play as a catalyst for interest in activities that we believe they should be spending their time on anyway. The education system misses when they start with, we want you to do X, Y, and Z, instead of starting with, what are your interests, what are your desires, and can we do that together? And for many of those kids, well, that's video games. That's a platform for success in youth development, no matter what sphere we're talking about it. In this case, we're talking about technical education.
The students wrote songs and then produced the tracks and recorded all the instruments and voices that they needed for their songs over the course of the first week. And then for the second week, they conceptualized and directed and filmed and edited their own music videos.
I feel like everybody loves music. And for kids like us in Rockwood to have something like this, like the tools that you guys provide for us, I feel like it's really important because we can get our, our story out. We can tell about what we're going through in these streets and stuff.
I'm here to teach classes about phones and tablets to anyone in the community, but we have a lot of seniors here.
I think there really is a need for classes like this. I think that a lot of us who didn't grow up with these kinds of things, we're just kind of overwhelmed by them.
The elders that we serve and we work with, particularly the folks that you've connected us with, have are so gracious. They're so pleased to be supported without someone trying to attach an extra service or an extra fee. All parties coming in just to want to learn, just to want to get better, just to want to improve the community.
Now watch these next screens. This is all the groups that are in partnership on this project. You've got a car dealership, you've got the city, you've got the Regulatory Commission. Free Geeks is a nonprofit that rebuilds discarded computers. Remember when they said you finish the course and you get a free computer? A rebuilt computer that came from Free Geeks. There's another organization that was at 57 Girls. It's all about getting young women involved in media and technology related things. The whole concept of this project, and it's driven by resources that came out of, for community programming that came out of the franchise renewal process, is to really ratchet up this whole concept of what we used to call access TV to really today's world, which is community media and technology, and deliver services to whether it's seniors or youth, whether it's teenage youth or older, no matter who it is, to provide services that are really designed to help partner and meet the needs of the community. So that's the sort of thing we're starting to see when people look at what are the needs for the community in the future. This was an interesting project, I think, because it is a great collaboration. I mean, and it gets us out of thinking about cable TV and gets us thinking about media, technology, how do we want it to serve our community in the future. There are a number of other projects similar to that that have popped up as a result of renewal processes and of resources that have come out of the renewal process around the country. Grand Rapids, Michigan has a really interesting project where they run, there's again a nonprofit group that runs the community access, the Park TV type channels, but they run a full power FM radio station. They manage a community theater project. They build websites for nonprofits. They do all kinds of services. Now that project started with that kind of vision 15 years ago because of the gentleman who was in charge of that project at that point in time. He just was looking like way out ahead of the curve from going just beyond the sort of concept of cable TV and TV. But thinking about it, it's just tools. These are just media tools that create content we all want to see, but they can do a lot of other things. So that's what we talk about, what some of the opportunities for the future are, what's happening in other places as outcomes of renewal. I wanted to give you that vision because because you probably wouldn't have thought about that at all. And the sorts of things you just saw if somebody hadn't shared with you the fact that it's popping up all over the place and all over the country. So any thoughts in your mind, any questions that come to your mind as we sort of start to take a little deeper dive into this stuff? Yeah.
Sue, you've come to know St. Louis Park a lot over the last few months, and you look at some of the things that have been done around the country. Do you have any thoughts at this point about some unique things that this community could do to service its constituents?
Well, okay, so I'm learning, and I'm going to learn more, because one of the things we're going to be doing in January is having some community focus groups, and that's part of what we're going to want you to help us with, and also do an online survey. I mean, my instincts here are that number one, there's a lot of interest in environmental issues. There's a lot of interest in arts. There's a lot of interest in diversity and sharing and transparency. All of these things sort of slide right in my brain. There's a lot of interest in partnering and working together. I mean, I think the kind of project you saw on the screen, maybe not exactly the same, but something similar with different organizations and city and school agencies partnering, I think there's a lot of possibility for it, okay, here. Because you guys already have a culture, okay, of doing these sorts of things. So in other communities, there might be much bigger hurdles to jump to get to the idea that this is something we can do together. This is something we can help. The other thing is, for me, is that Jackie was driving me around yesterday, because one of the things when I come to start to work in a community, I want geographically, I want to visually see the place. And I learned that there's no real kind of traditional downtown, okay? And I learned that a lot of things, there's a lot of different kinds of high-rise, a lot of new buildings high-rise buildings being built. And so I think in my own brain, one of the things that it will be important for this community to do is to, as new people move in to all these buildings, to develop keep a sense of community, that community that has been here for a long time, and share that sense of community. And using media tools to help do that, I think, particularly that I think there will be younger people moving into some of these buildings, that is the way they relate, okay? And so I think that there's a great opportunity to use media tools to help keep that sense of community and who we are. The new nature center that's being built, all these sorts of things. So I'm just learning, but I'm seeing the pieces in my own brain from other places, sort of how they might apply here. But I got a lot to learn, okay, about this community yet. I'm hoping that the pieces are sort of, you know, you're starting to kind of get a picture of what some of the things, interesting things might be that could come out with resources that could come out of the renewal process, how they might be used. And with that, you know, I've talked about a number of things on the screen already, but basically HD, what we call the electronic programming guide, resources to be able to do community programming. These are all possibilities. I want to pull out, Amy had a couple things in your kit, because this information is really intended to be sort of the starting point for getting you guys who are leaders within your constituencies a lot smarter about this process. The first thing I'm going to have you pull out is this green sheet. And it's just an FAQ, a frequently asked questions approach to the franchise renewal process. I'm going to dive into that a little bit deeper. The other thing I want you to pull out is the lavender lilac one, statutory requirements of the franchise renewal process. I don't know how many policy wonks we have in the room, okay? But I think it is important for you to understand a little bit what the city has to go through when they're doing renewal process. And I've got this up on the screen, but if you look at the statutory requirement sheet, the lavender sheet, what you're going to see is that the renewal process is a 3-year process. It started just back time from January 2021, 3 years before. That's when the process actually started, when the cable company had to say, hey, I want my franchise renewed, okay? It requires the city to take a look at, has the company complied with its current franchise agreement? Oh, something that I'm doing and I shouldn't have. A franchise agreement is simply the contract, the landlord-lease tenant relationship. We call them franchises in this business, but it's a contract. Looking at, has a company complied with it? I mean, and what's interesting to me is, in too many cases, people cities go, okay, we're sure they complied with it. We don't take a look at it. But really, any other contract a local government has with an entity, you want to make sure that the company delivering the service is doing what it's supposed to do. So performance review is really important. And then the community needs assessment. And the community needs assessment we're going to talk about a little bit more. But but the pink sheet, this is the public input process, and I'll be talking more about it. But this gives you some details of what we've already been doing here in this, as the city of St. Louis Park, and what we'll be doing in the future. The performance review and the needs assessment, the public input part, you use that information. You use that information to create the foundation for what you go to the negotiating table with. If you skip those steps, the cable company knows you skipped those steps because this is the federal process. And they're just going to keep saying no to anything you ask for because you actually haven't done your, in quotes, due diligence. So that's why the performance review and the needs assessment become really critical to what comes out the other end of the negotiating process. There are basically 2 procedures you go through with franchise renewal: the informal process, which is the negotiations, or the formal process, which happens when you can't get to yes in the negotiations, and then you go through what we call a formal request for renewal proposal. All of that is outlined on the lavender sheet. I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds on it, except that if you want more information, it's here, or just ask me, because I've been through it one too many times in my life. But what I can tell you is that this information really kind of, hopefully, if you take a little bit, spend a little time with it, creates an understanding, a basic understanding of what the city has to do when these franchises come up for renewal. And let's kind of tick down here a little bit farther. What do you do when you're doing a performance review? Well, you simply take, okay, what in the contract, what are the deliverables? What does the company have to do? Here, yes or no? It's pretty simple kind of auditing almost process, okay? One of the key things that goes along with that is, remember that 5% franchise fee we mentioned earlier that's in the current franchise? You need to make sure that they actually paid the 5% correctly, okay? And there's a couple of things that come into play with that. Number one, in the franchise agreement, there's a definition of what gross revenues are, and that's what I call the basket from which the 5% is computed, so to speak. And what we find sometimes is that the cable company, sometimes totally inadvertently, it's not purposeful, doesn't put everything in the basket they're supposed to put in the basket from which the 5% is calculated. Now, you may say, well, that shouldn't be that hard. It's what I pay for my bill. It's a lot more than that. They sell advertising. And that advertising appears on the cable system. That goes into the gross revenue basket. Home shopping. People do home shopping. A portion of what people in St. Louis Park, and this gets proportioned down from federal, from the corporate level, from different places all over the country, down a portion of that, because it comes from the cable side of the 3 things they do, goes into the gross revenue basket. Yeah.
Is that like QVC?
Yeah.
Really?
The stuff that's on, yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Sometimes, not too much in the last few years, but if you go back to when your franchise was the 2006, 2008, 9, 10 era, there were new services being added. You know, how many ESPNs have been added since 2006? A lot, okay? All right, so there's agreements between the cable operator and, let's say, ESPN or another commercial service, that where the cable operator, the commercial service that's being launched on the cable system, gives the cable company money to launch the service. Those launch fees go in the gross revenue basket because they have to do with the cable side. So this is not quite as straight, as you can see, it's not as straightforward as what I pay for my bill and figure out the 5%. Okay, it is much more complex than that. That is a piece of what one does when one does the performance review, is making sure that they calculated the 5% right. And then all of the other things are all have they delivered on all of the locations where they're supposed to be able to provide live programming from right now. There are a number in the franchise agreement. Do they all work? So it's really straightforward. Now you're going, well, why is that such a big deal? Well, if the company hasn't complied with its current contract, you want to give them notice and say, fix this please, okay? And if they say, we don't agree with you, then that stuff comes over into the negotiating process and becomes part of the tools in the city's negotiating tool belt as to what might be in the new franchise. So you can hope you begin to see how the performance piece, before you enter into a new contract with this company, you want to make sure they've done what they were supposed to do under the current one. And that's just good business practices and so forth, okay? Those are the sorts of things that the city looks at when they do a performance review. Now, let's look at the needs assessment side, and I'm going to go to this next piece. And that is, so here's the needs assessment side is just a fancy name for public input process. If you go to, I'm going to have you pull out a couple of things. We're going to go to this pink sheet, okay? And also the really cool postcard that the city has put together. What we're going to be doing to get input from the community is to do a series of community focus group meetings and an online survey, okay? And the focus group meetings are going to be January 22nd and 23rd, and information about them are on this card. It's up right on the city's website right now. People can RSVP for the focus group meetings right now. And one of the things we're going to want you to help us with is to get a lot of people to those community focus group meetings. Now, so you understand what we do with them. They are not, I'll just put it not so gently, bitch sessions, okay? The purpose of them is to give people a little bit of a sense of what can be in the renewal and we're going to ask them questions. We're going to brainstorm. So what are the big issues in St. Louis Park in the next 5 or 6 years? What are the things you're trying to communicate as the person with the League of Women Voters or with the arts groups or whatever, or groups that serve low-income population, whatever it might be, or the religious community? What is the information you're trying to get out? What makes it hard for you to get information to the people you're trying to reach? If there were no barriers, what would you like to see on your community channels? How would you like to use them? So we get people to think in very much almost a strategic planning kind of mode, looking out ahead based on where they're at, where their organization, their cause, or their interests lie. What do they want to see for the future? And then what would make it easier? So we do in these focus groups sort of a little primer at the front, and then we brainstorm a group, a number of questions. That information then leads us to an online survey. And that online survey will be launched on January 22nd and will stay open till March 13th. Open to anybody in the community who wants to respond, okay? And it's going to ask questions that relate to cable service, like picture and sound quality of the Comcast services that you receive, okay? It'll ask questions about whether you watch Park TV channels, which ones do you watch, which programming do you watch, what would you like to see in the future? And the survey is designed so that if you answer, I don't subscribe to cable, you don't have to answer a whole bunch of other questions. In other words, it's designed to, the more engaged you have been, the more questions you will answer, and the less engaged you have been, the fewer questions. But we find out a lot of very good information, like how many people subscribe to cable, who came? Do they take the high definition tier? How often do they watch something that's not in high definition? Do they use the electronic programming guide? How and why did they use the electronic programming guide? If they're a subscriber, have they called a cable operator in the last year? If they have, did they get them put on hold, never to call out of hold for 6 months? I'm exaggerating, but we get a lot of sort of basic service information and information about what the community sees as important. Is it important to have a local office for Comcast here in town or not? Lots of things like that that are about community programming, about Park TV, about the way people would like to use cable in the future, the kind of content you would like to see, or other folks would like to see. All of that information is going to come out through that online survey. And when we get done with that piece, the other thing we do, and as you see on the screen, is the evaluation of the current, what we call PEG stands for Public Education and Government. The current PEG access services and channels. Have people used the equipment? Have they not used the equipment? What condition is it in? What's the quality of the picture, quality and so forth? Because we can't know where we need to go in the future if we don't know where we're at right now. So the purpose of the evaluation of the current operation is to say, okay, where are we at right now? So that when we as the city start to negotiate for things for the future, we know where we're at. For instance, is all the equipment in great shape? Or is some of the equipment, I know I saw some very, very, very old equipment over at the high school, as an example. 13, 14, 15 years old, okay? Bottom line is some of the equipment way old and way out of date? If the answer to that question is yes, then we need to figure out, well, what do we need to do about that? What do we need for the future? That is part of that evaluation of the current resources that are available in the community now. Then we typically have a public hearing, and all of that information comes together into a report, which goes to the attorney, and to the city, and to the attorney the city has retained to help negotiate the franchise agreement, the new agreement with Comcast. So let me stop there for a second before we kind of go to kind of tie things up here. Questions you have, things that, as you think about things you'd like to see for the future. Are there things that kind of, maybe even based on some things you just saw from Gresham and from Metro East, that might be of interest? Yeah.
I was looking at like the production equipment, and I know that our young people are really into that and want to do different kinds of productions, whether it's music, film, video, or whatever. I could see that as being something that could really support our young people. I just don't know, like, can you have several places where it's located? Does it all have to be located in one place? Or, I mean, what's the access to it then after that?
Well, let's throw that out and bounce it around the room. It kind of varies. The DIY Rockwood project that you saw, in that particular community, the community channels are run by a nonprofit that was set up when the original franchises were granted. So Metro East has a studio. That facility you saw that they walked into is actually a retired police precinct station that was sitting empty. And it was in this neighborhood, this Rockwood neighborhood. And so in their case, they've got now the Rockwood neighborhood facility, and then they have, in conjunction with the city of Gresham, and then they have their main facility. So it can be multiple places. The other thing that you need to think about along the lines of what you're saying is, when does it need to be open? If it closes at 5, then a lot of people can't even use it. So what we're seeing is that in some cases you have spaces that are open after 5. Many community, what we call community media and technology centers, they keep their doors open till, depending, maybe not every night, but maybe to 9 at night and maybe part of a day on the weekend or whatever. So it's like a library. So it's open when people have time to come and use the resources. Other questions or thoughts?
What about the staffing? I mean, none of this stuff can be, you can have it open, but in order for it to be successful, you have to have knowledgeable staffing to support people doing this. Is that part of the franchise agreement for funding for staffing?
That's probably the trickiest part. And so I'm going to give you sort of there's multi threads to answering your question. In many communities, the city uses part of that 5% to help with the staffing and operation. It depends on how, just as here, you have a certain amount of money. You may have noticed on the slide, there was $1 million for capital over 15 years. If you go back to that slide, okay. It kind of depends on how one negotiates that additional funding in addition to the 5%. Some places negotiate it in a way that they can use that for any community programming, PAG-related, community media-related purpose. So it can be used for staff. Okay. In other cases, it's limited to capital. Okay. And without getting too deep in the weeds, well, what is capital? Okay. Capital, there are ways of using capital. It pays for maintenance of the equipment. It pays for maintenance of a facility. It doesn't pay for the people who do the training. Okay. So in answer to your question, number one, you can negotiate funding for what I call the operations side, but it's more difficult than the capital side. Number two, the 5% is very frequently used to cover that operations side. Okay. And number three, the staffing, the type of staffing in today's world is pretty different than it was 15 or 20 years ago as far as the way you need to staff these facilities. What you saw in that example was that actually the trainer for smartphones and tablets for seniors was from a nonprofit group in the community who provides training. Okay? It was a collaboration with that organization. So that organization provided the trainers for that particular training seniors and to use smartphones and tablets. Okay? The gaming one, you saw the man who was working with the kids on gaming and technical education. He works for a nonprofit organization of people who are involved in gaming, positive gaming issues, okay, and technical education. So the staffing thing gets really very interesting. Those are specific examples. Those aren't the people who keep the doors open. Those are the people who provide the training at the facility. So it's this partnership concept again. So and I find in my experience that when you have that approach to stuff, where you have a more collaborative approach, you have a richer, it gets more embedded into the community because and more people are just naturally involved in it, okay, because they're involved on a lot of different levels. Yeah?
So following up on Lisa and Tom's comments, anecdotally we could think that that would be a good idea to be very attractive to the students. Mm-hmm. Measuring that really takes some work. So in the survey work, the Survey Monkey tool, will that be the tool that Lisa and Tom, or let's say Benilde or some other schools can use to measure the actual level of interest in that kind of opportunity? Or if not, how else do we measure it?
Well, I guess, here's the problem. You can't measure that if people don't know what it looks like. Okay, you wouldn't have known about that if I probably hadn't have shown that thing. So you can't ask somebody you want chocolate ice cream if they've never had chocolate ice cream in their life and they never knew what it tasted like. That's the tricky part of this, okay? So you can't measure it now. What you can find out, though, for instance, we already know people have, well, not everybody, many people have a smartphone. That smartphone has a camera, and we see people using that camera all the time. Using classes to show people how to take and do good videos with their smartphones. It's a tool they have in their pocket already, all right? So in answer to your question, we'll find some of that sort of thing that's out, but you can't get, it's gotta be out there in the field. And also the other thing is, what DIY Rockwood looks like today may be very different than it looks like in 5 years. That project was designed to meet a community development need in a particular neighborhood at a particular point in time. And so as we look at where we go with this concept of using media and technology in our community to meet the community's needs, we've got to be really careful that we don't get ourselves locked in today. So I know this is it was a complicated answer to the question, but it's a kind of thinking that actually ends up providing the foundation for negotiating resources that can be used really more effectively long term. But the other piece of it is you got to be thinking, you got to have people thinking about long-term things. There's got to be this cross-fertilization of ideas and needs, and whether it's business and youth or arts and folks, low-income folks, whatever it is. There's a way of thinking about how you operate and provide these services in the community that's absolutely critical to have things like that happen. They don't happen magically. They happen because people talk to each other and really and work together. Yeah.
I don't know, this might be obvious, but I'm wondering about the potential collaboration between the city and the county and expanding, community and use of the libraries as well as schools. And
No, that is a natural collaboration. Libraries in particular, and I know here we have the libraries are county library system. They are a natural partner in this sort of thing, frankly. They provide resources to the public, a lot of different kinds of resources. They have meeting spaces, okay? So having a partnership with the county library system or the library here in St. Louis Park to do some of this sort of thing makes a lot of sense. So, and answer your question, yeah. I mean, the key here is, again, thinking like this as part of this process, and then the city's got to do all this negotiation. But frankly, what we find is we get all of this information coming out of the needs assessment. And, and we're sort of doing the Johnny Appleseed thing a little bit here, throwing out ideas about what people are doing, what they can do. And some of this stuff can launch before they're ever done with the negotiations. And that's the interesting thing, part about what I've seen with this, is that there's a real community engagement and education process that goes on when one does a needs assessment like this, and you can start working on this stuff before they're done negotiating, because some of the core things may very, very well be in place right now to start to create a foundation for it. Other questions that kind of come to mind?
Just going back to the thoughts I have, I'll harp on this because as a school district, this is kind of the slow death that happened in our school system, especially at the high school, when it came to doing any sort of production around media productions in our schools. It's a multidisciplinary thing to create a well put together production. You have the technical aspect of it, you have the writing aspect of it, you have the art aspect of it, all those pieces. We struggled internally in our high school at finding a teacher who wanted to take on that multiple disciplinary piece. You might have somebody who was strong in one of those three areas. So I look at what happened to our media productions classes, and the reason you see the ancient equipment over at the high school is that class doesn't exist anymore. The students, well, really it's about, again, the backbone of having a program or system is having the right staff that are there as a stable portion of that. So, I mean, I'm looking at Paul to the left. How much production is happening here because Paul is an employee here? How much is happening because of John, because of what his involvement is as an employee here? There's all of that collaboration that can take place with volunteer and all that sort of thing. But I think without having that stable backbone of people who really have the know, it becomes very challenging to have your visions of what can happen if those pieces aren't in place.
You bring up something that, frankly, and I'll just be real direct about this. We don't see a lot of engagement by schools nowadays. And for some of the very reasons you just point out. What we do see is classes being taught at the Community Media Center for the school by people who have certification to teach and who specialize in that multifaceted thing you're talking about. And there are other kinds of classes, depending on the school district and so on and so forth. I have a video. I've got a video I may dig out here. It's an example of a project. It's from Clovis, California, and it is a youth summer sports production camp. But they run it year-round. But it is a partnership between CART, which is a technology high school, and the Community Media Center that serves Clovis and Fresno. Okay. And it is, young people are producing live semi-pro soccer games. And they're learning everything about live production, whether it's play-by-play, slow-mo, everything, okay? Another place that's doing a similar project like that is in Marin, California, where it's with a AAA baseball team. Now, the attractiveness to this, in this particular thing, is you got kids who like sports, you got kids who like technology, and the whole idea of being out there and being with the team, semi-pro teams and be able to, very cool, all right? But there are a lot of other examples like that. But most of the things I've seen, frankly, are not, with rare exceptions, in a traditional kind of classroom setting. And for whatever reason, maybe it's just the nature of our world today versus the way it was, X amount of years ago. There is another good example of this is in Lafayette, Louisiana. In Lafayette, Louisiana, KDN Open Channel runs the channels, and they have a partnership with the high school, and they teach all the journalism classes at the Community Media Center. Okay. But the thing about what you're talking about also is we've got this world today that we're dealing with this whole concept of news deserts. Okay, just like we have food deserts. Okay, and what's happening to really hyper-local newspapers around the country, and we're losing them. And to be able to get young people involved in really understanding how to do journalism and not being, the thing that I find sometimes at school, there's all kinds of video going on at schools and it never gets on the channels. It's the morning announcements, okay? Why not put the morning announcements on, all right? It's, the coach is videoing the football game practice sessions because they want to work with the kids and so on. There's stuff going on, but there's this kind of hang up, and if it doesn't look perfectly 100% commercial, then we don't want to put it on. Hey, look at what you see on the internet. Look at it's not perfectly 100% whatever, all right? It's about what's happening in the community. So I think sometimes it means a flip over a little bit in how traditional academia looks at using these tools. But I understand it is very much a cross-disciplinary thing you're talking about. And it's, some people are producers and some people are into writing and the artistic side of it. It's not an easy thing to put into a curriculum. I know, like Fall River, Massachusetts, the high school there runs a channel, and they have a full curriculum around all the aspects of it. But that's something that they've been building for 25 years. And that's kind of why it continues to exist. Other questions are, this is really good because we can talk more about this stuff to get you guys thinking about, what would make it easy, what would make it hard, what are the things we need to think about. Any other questions that come to mind right now?
I just come back to, at one point in time, there was Comcast had a studio here in the city that was over off Park Glen Road. Was that correct? Beltline, yeah. And they closed that down, and then the focus went to our high school, the facility at our high school, which presented its own challenges because trying to have community come into the middle of a high school in the middle of a school day, it would just, presented its own unique sorts of things. So as we're thinking about, again, community access to these facilities, we really have to be thinking about strategically where that is. And schools, and with the nature of schools now being very locked down.
Yep.
Very locked down.
Very locked down, exactly. The
It
world has changed.
It just makes that much more of a challenge if you're looking for a facility,
Well, and to me that says, okay, we already have existing spaces in this community, in many communities, like the libraries, as an example, like some city facilities that stay open after 5 o'clock. All right. Maybe there's a way of creating, taking our concept of what we're doing now and building on it, okay, and growing it, to embrace some of these other things and to build partnerships with other organizations and faith, I mean, you name it, faith-based groups, you name it. I mean, it's happening in different ways depending on the community. And part of what I'm going to try to do is just throw some stuff out there for you guys to start thinking about based on the stuff that I've seen over the. Now I see last week in Grand Rapids. I was give a cute story, but I was out in Grand Rapids, Minnesota last week, and doing a process similar to this. And the woman who runs the Community Media Center there, which is run by a nonprofit, we were talking about, you know, videos they'd done and stuff they put on YouTube. And they were saying, you know, they have one video in particular that they have on YouTube that gets lots of clicks. It's very popular. Guess what it is? Just throw out a guess what it might be. Is it a football game? What? How to dress a deer. She said they get about $100 a month of clicks off YouTube. This video on how to dress a deer. Okay. Now it seems.
Oh, nice. Jason, you could do it at one of the rinks. You know?
Bring your roadkill over, right? How to dress a squirrel.
You know, I learned all this interesting thing. I mean, it was just sort of like Beth George, who's the ED there. It's like, we were like, how to dress. There is the plaque on the wall. They're just, stuff reflects community, okay? And so what I want you to do as we think about next steps is, I really would love to have at least 150 people at these 3 meetings.
At what?
January 22nd and 23rd, we're having focus group meetings, and they're on the card here. Jackie's going to be mailing these out, but there are extras of these. If you have public places where they can be put out, okay, and displayed, please feel free to do it. You can, and we ask people to RSVP, excuse me, for the focus groups, only because we're going to feed everybody who comes to the meetings and stuff like that. We want to make sure we have all the stuff in place to make sure people have, you know, have a pleasant experience when we're doing this exercise of brainstorming. And it'll be different than this meeting. Some of the things that are in this meeting I'll be talking about, but it'll be much more about answering questions and brainstorming and recording stuff on the wall and discussing things and bouncing ideas around the room. It's really a traditional kind of brainstorming focus group kind of approach. But I wanted to today to kind of anchor you guys in stuff that the city has to be thinking about, and also anchor you in some of the things that are happening around the country. So if you have a newsletter or a website you're in charge of or your organization is involved with, we'd really appreciate it if you would put this information out about it. Jackie can give you lots more of examples of stuff. If you want a couple paragraphs for your website or newsletter, she can get it for you. But the idea is, understanding the time of the year we're in, we're trying to get the word out now before we hit early December, okay? And then we know that from about the 10th or 15th of December on, or in the holidays, whatever your holidays might be, people are going to be occupied with other things. And then we're going to hit it hard again right at the beginning of January. But we would love to see like at least 150 people, about, at the total of the 3 meetings. Not at each meeting, okay, but at the total of the 3 meetings, that we have about 150 people total. And I think that would be a good representation. If we get more, that's even better, okay? I mean, we were talking about the fact I will be here to do the meetings. If suddenly we get lots of more people, we can always maybe have an extra meeting if we need to do it. That's fine. Then after the meetings are over, we're going to have that online survey. And again, we're going to need your assistance getting the word out. So you're kind of part of the outreach team. And the more you can share this with other people that you engage with regularly, the better. Because it's going to give the city the tools it needs to be able to do the best job possible at the negotiating table when they're negotiating the renewed franchise with Comcast. There's some other things in your kit I haven't pointed out. One of the ones that I think is probably most of you, I mean, if you look at this yellow sheet and you look at the strategic, the core vision for the future that the city of St. Louis Park has put forward for itself, you're going to see a lot of commonality between the core values that are here and the core mission and strategic goals that the city of St. Louis Park has set for itself. Jackie shared those with me when I started this project, and it was sort of interesting. This is not something I just did. This is sort of the core background of why we have this community part of the franchise agreement in the first place in the channels. So I wanted to point that out to you so that you had that and were aware of its purpose and why it was in the kit. Does anybody have any other questions or any other things they want to bounce around the room, because you got my attention?
I think just maybe a comment, and I thank you, Sue, for mentioning how we need you all to work with your constituents to try to get them to these meetings, fill out the surveys and so forth, so we can hear those ideas. Sue alluded to changes in technology. So the current franchise went into effect in January 2006. We didn't get our first social media site going until 2008. And so at the time we were doing this, the world, was about to change pretty radically. And so it is important to think ahead, to try to envision what's coming in the next 10 years. And even though video killed the radio star, nothing's killed video yet. Video is still important. The transport may be changing. It may be going for a lot of people from cable TV channels to what they call over the top, the Amazon Prime services and others, Hulu and so forth. But video is still important to people of all ages. And so it's just a question of how it is delivered and how it's produced and what's valuable and important to people. I'm thinking about, for example, the new Nature Center as just one example that's going to go online sometime middle of next year and be open. Well, what are the opportunities there for the people who visit the Nature Center, for the students who go there for classes and so forth? What are going to be their desires to capture those experiences in some sort of meaningful way? I think we're all asked to think about that in some way for the constituencies that we touch and interact with. So keeping that in mind, I think, will really help, I hope, encourage you and convince people to come to these information sessions that Sue mentioned.
I mentioned this, and I thought you might be interested in it. Let me back it up. This is the Youth Media Broadcasting Camp that I was telling you about. And this is a different kind of example, but I just thought you might, since we got a minute here, all right, there we go. There we go. No, we're not getting it?
Live production is different because you don't have that opinion saying, oh, that's the document.
Oh, that's the doc cam, yeah.
Yeah.
You want to go back to the
What you
last
see is what the audience is going to see.
It's hard at first.
I'll stop it.
You don't really know what to do, but
This is a spur of the moment thing. I sprung on these guys, okay?
The doc cam works.
He's lost his input.
And this was, what I was going to show you was this youth broadcasting video camp example and it's kind of it's just an example of what's another sort of thing that's going on out there. And again, the neat thing about this is it shows how it's the kids talking about what they're learning in the process of working with this project. Should I try it again? It's coming.
It's definitely easy to catch on.
Yeah.
I mean, you learn pretty quickly. I mean, if you won't.
It won't do it?
It won't let it broadcast through the room because it's TV grade.
Okay, never mind. We won't, well, you'll get to see that when you come to focus groups. How does that sound? That's a teaser. Okay. But it's just another one. I was just another one of the examples. Oh, there it is. Now what the, Jermaine, what?
Probably because you closed your lid. Just hit play and then see if it'll.
Yeah, close your hit play and close the lid.
Okay, let's try that again. Get it back up here.
Work around stuff.
Okay, I'm going to back it up here just a wee bit. I'm going to hit play.
What you see is what the audience is going to see.
Maybe. Maybe not. You are going to have to wait to the focus groups. Well, that gets you the video. You just don't get the sound.
Team effort.
Oh,
So
oh, Jermaine's in the back. He's making it happen.
Everything just from watching and doing.
When I show up to a live CMAC production, I know for a fact that I'm going to learn something new. I'm going to learn new skills. I'm going to get better at the skills that I already know. Overall, I'm just going to come out of it better than I was before.
On this type of production, team means not only like having a leader there, but also having friends, like multiple friends. Everybody's willing to help you out and listen. The staff at CMAC is really supportive and helpful, and they're also just really friendly in general and really welcoming.
Live production is unique because you really only get one shot. You don't get a do-over like in normal stuff with like sets and all that kind of stuff. It's really just like go, go, go.
The Fresno Fuego first place in the Southwestern Division, and coming off a road trip that went about as perfect as you could get.
I love video production because of all of the hard work and like determination that it takes, because a lot of people, they're like, oh, I want to go into video production, but they don't really understand that it's actually more work than setting up a camera and pressing record.
I like working under pressure because it really motivates me to get things done. My job as a technical director is to push buttons when the director tells me to, and that will bring things onto the screen, like bugs or different camera cuts.
I get a lot of the celebrations of the players when they finally make that goal. I get a lot of the corner kicks. I get a lot of like just the on-the-field action that kind of allows the viewer to actually be inside the actual game itself. I love video production because to me it seems like it's one giant puzzle that just needs to be solved.
The first time that I saw my replays on air, I felt sort of a sense of accomplishment because I knew that that was me.
Can't get it, left foot from Blanco, but it's finally in! The attack continues!
And just knowing that I was able to do that and have it look good, it just makes me feel really good.
Before I came into live production, I had never done anything that was a live shoot at all. You know, now I'm able to pull cables and run cameras and set up like all these other different things. The entire thing is a learning experience. So if you have no experience to begin with, you're gonna come out learning something new, and you're gonna enjoy doing it.
To me, CMAC is really a community. I've met a lot of people, like a lot of great people that I think I will still be in contact with after this. Like, if I need to work on something, you still know someone that is interested in the same thing as you are. I will never forget this experience.
We all love the same thing, which is just creating media in general. Overall, it's just a very interesting experience, and it's awesome.
Give it a shot because you might end up belonging there more than you think you do.
So there, CART is the high school I was talking to you about, the Center for Advanced Research and Technology, which is a technology-based high school. Let me stop this now. Get out of here. But I mean, it's another example, but it does take the I don't need my email. It does take the it's not in the classroom is I guess where I'm going here, and that's what I think we're seeing more and more of, is these collaborative projects with youth, like some of the ones you saw in the Metro East project, and this one that are not in the classroom. They're in a different kind of environment, and that may be something that may be a really good fit here in kind of a partnership situation. I don't know. I'm still learning. Okay, about St. Louis Park, and you guys know the community a whole lot better than I do. I just want you guys to make me smarter about it so that I can do my job, and part of making me smarter about it is to have everybody come to the focus groups, okay? So any other questions? Yeah.
One thing that just came to mind watching that is last week I went to, or I toured or participated in this virtual reality lab over in
Rem-
St. Louis Park.
Rem 5.
Rem 5, right.
Yeah.
I think, you know, that's important resource for the future to connect with,
Yeah.
with them.
It definitely is. In fact, in a number of places, they're actually doing virtual reality stuff at the community media centers. They're sort of the group that's sort of launching that kind of stuff. But you are exactly right. That's the kind of thinking we need to be having as we look at this process and look at what, I mean, it's just really key. Don't confine your thinking about this stuff. Really keep it very broad. Think of a great big umbrella. I mean, who would have thought VR, okay, was going to be something, even 3 years ago, that any one of us would have gone to, okay? But I was at was it 2 years ago, I was doing a project in Missoula, Montana, and the Access Center had actually bought the equipment, and they had a Saturday virtual reality class with kids, with young kids, I mean like 8, 9, 10-year-olds, okay, at the media center, okay. Just because the guy who was the ED there was really interested in it. They're doing an interesting collaboration now there in Missoula with the library. The county was building a brand new main library system because you know, they serve Missoula in a huge amount of geographic area. And so they're in a collaboration, the nonprofit there who runs the community media center and the channels, they are going to be located in the new county library. I mean, from the beginning, the planning of building the new library included them in that process. There's 3 nonprofits that are part of that library project, and the community media center was one of them. But that goes to the concept of that we talked about earlier, how libraries fit into this so nicely.
I guess that's kind of what I've been mulling over, because I think one of the things that our community's been trying to grapple with is the disconnection and how many residents feel disconnected from the community. We have a lot of residents who are newcomers to the community, and I think that's a real challenge that requires a lot of different responses for people to feel more part of this community and be more engaged in this community. So I've been mulling over the different ways that this could fit into, you know, having people feel more participatory in their community, whether it's a community media center as part of that, or other ways of more effectively communicating opportunities and events in the community. But are there ways that even like with a community media center or something else where you're also encouraging physical gathering? Physical, whether like something like what you were just saying with the library, being part of the library, because libraries are great community gathering spaces, but are there other ways that those kinds of ideas can be melded? Because there's a lot of value in communicating something over television and social media, but you can't really be in-person gatherings. And are there ways that we could leverage pieces of this to have people physically together more?
Well, I mean, I was just thinking about the new nature center that's being built that we drove by yesterday, and the educational classes that are going to happen there, the things about and that will be at the nature center, okay, in the new facility, and just featuring the grand opening of the facility, letting people know about it, okay. And then having certain activities. I mean, this is part of bringing people. People are involved. You take people at what their interest might be. All right, and so yeah, I think yes, there are a lot of. And I'm one who personally, my work is technology, but to me, it's worth nothing if we don't have people talking to each other and not staring at their phones all the time and I mean. I really think it's important to bring people together and have conversations about stuff. The media can be a tool to help facilitate that, okay? But it's not on its own. Now, and it's actually one of the biggest hurdles I think we find in some communities where you have a lot of new people coming in and they don't know what's going on in the community. They don't even know how to connect with a city service or with something at the library or at the nature center or whatever. Just using this as a tool to get people to come together, I think is a fantastic idea. Other things that kind of our conversation today is kind of triggering.
Just thinking about the future or not really the future, but now and where things are expanding. So I was whispering to Paul, I said, have you guys started looking into any drone photography at this point in time?
Jermaine?
Well, it's gonna pop out. Well, it's a huge, you know, it's a huge part of photography now.
Oh, yeah.
And you think about what drone photography could do for showing your constituents in this community, their community from a different angle, you know, and it's, tell Comcast you need a fleet of drones. Hey, we can start a whole new class at the high school.
Yeah, I think you can have.
They have fun with it too at the high school.
I think, Sue, that this last video, though, also struck me, and it's related to Derek's statement, is that, you know, at least I hear that statistics are showing young people being more and more isolated without real constant friendships and relationships. And one of the things that really touched me about this video was the young lady who was speaking about how it was great to be with all these people even for a while, and that she's now developed relationships that she can continue in the future. And that's something that it seems to me is really missing in this world of technology that we have, that we've lost that balance between technology and real life, you know.
It's the team building thing. It's just knowing that, and also, I mean, as I look at that, I wish there were more young women involved in it because there was only one. But the bottom line is, it's also bringing, it's integrating at all different kinds of levels people together around issues. And you're right. I mean, that's kind of why I like to show that video, because it does a lot of things, but just the conversation, the things you hear the kids saying about how they feel about being part of the project. There's a similar one that the folks down in Marin County have done with the young people that are involved in their that semi-pro baseball live broadcasting camp they do. The young people walk away from that with an experience that's more than just how to turn a camera on or run equipment. It really is about how you have to work as a team to accomplish things. I'm going to wrap us up here. Thanks for all your good thoughts. If you have any questions for me, just let me know, or Jackie knows I'm around for the rest of the day. Please.
Yep, there's a couple big stacks of these out on the table, so if you'd like to take some for your facility.